My name is Elena Vance. I am 44 years old. 3 weeks ago, I sold my architectural firm, a company I built from a single drafting table in a rented garage, for $15 million. Then, on the quiet, steady advice of my husband, I sat at my kitchen table, picked up my phone, and told my parents and my sister that I had gone completely, utterly bankrupt. What they did next, within hours, not days, proved a theory my husband had held like a silent weight for 15 years. And what happened at my parents' 45th anniversary gala, in front of 100 of the city's most influential guests, is the reason I will never answer their calls again. Before I take you into that ballroom, before I show you the look on my mother's face when the mask finally slipped, I want you to look at your own life. If you have ever been the one person your family calls only when the check is due, but the first one they forget when the celebration starts, then this story is for you. Take a moment to like and subscribe, not for me, but to remind yourself that setting a boundary isn't a betrayal. It's an act of survival. Drop your city and the time in the comments. I want to know where the light is hitting as you listen to this. Let me take you back to a rainy Tuesday morning in April. The air in the attorney's office was thick with the scent of expensive leather and old mahogany. Across from me sat Arthur Sterling, a man who had watched me grow from a nervous intern into a woman who designed the skyline of this city. Between us lay a stack of fanned-out documents. I signed my name 14 times. Each stroke of the pen transferred my legacy, my patents, my firm, and the contracts for the new waterfront development, to a global conglomerate. Julian, my husband, sat beside me. He didn't say a word. He just placed his hand over mine under the table and squeezed once when the last page was turned. $15 million. 20 years ago, my father handed me the failing branch of his construction business like a consolation prize, a tax write-off he expected me to sink within a year. My sister, Sarah, got the prestige. She got the Ivy League degree, the trust fund, and the high society wedding. I got a basement office with a leaking pipe and a mountain of debt. I taught myself structural engineering from manuals I bought at used bookstores. I slept on a cot in that office for 3 years because I couldn't afford rent and payroll at the same time. Not once did my mother come to see the dirt I was digging in. Not once did Sarah offer a hand. But they showed up later. They always showed up once the glass towers started rising and the awards started lining the shelves. As Arthur Sterling slid the final wire transfer confirmation across the desk, he lowered his glasses. "Congratulations, Elena," he said. "You've built a fortress. Just be careful who you let through the gates." Julian caught my eye. He had been waiting for that exact moment. On the drive home, he kept the radio off. The silence was heavy. "Elena," he said, staring at the road ahead. "Before you call your mother to tell her the good news, I need you to see something. I need you to see the truth before you let them turn your success into their next vacation." The kitchen table was bathed in the low, amber light of the pendant lamp when Julian laid it out. It wasn't a bank statement. It was a yellow legal pad, filled with his precise handwriting. At the top of the page was a number that made my breath hitch. $512,000. "That," Julian said, his voice a low vibration, "is the family tax you've paid over the last 15 years. Cash transfers, emergency mortgage payments for Sarah, medical bills for your father that insurance supposedly didn't cover, and the endless stream of loans that never saw a cent of interest." I stared at the ink. It looked like a ledger of my own exploitation. I tried to argue. I told him Sarah was struggling with her boutique. He flipped the page. "The week you sent her $20,000 for her rent arrears?" Julian pointed to a date. "She posted a photo from a private villa in Tuscany. She didn't tag you, Elena. She blocked you from that specific post, but she forgot I follow her husband." He flipped another page. "And your mother's emergency heart procedure? The one that required a $10,000 deposit?" I checked the hospital records. She was never admitted. But curiously, that was the same month she debuted that new diamond tennis bracelet at the country club. The house was silent around us, save for the hum of the refrigerator. I felt a coldness spreading from my chest to my fingertips. Julian wasn't angry. He was clinical. He was showing me the blueprints of a building designed to collapse. If you tell them about the 15 million, he said, leaning forward, they will be the most loving family in the world. They will throw you parties. They will call you every morning to tell you how proud they are. And you will spend the rest of your life wondering if a single word of it is real. I looked at the legal pad. 15 years of line items. Not once in that list was there a record of a phone call asking how I was doing after my car accident. Not once was there a thank you note that didn't include a request for just a little more. My family didn't see a daughter or a sister. They saw a resource. Tell them you're broke, Julian whispered. Tell them the firm went under, the lawsuits took everything, and the bank is coming for the house. Tell them you have nothing left to give. If they stand by you, I will burn this notepad and apologize to them on my knees. But if they don't, then at least you'll know what you're paying for. I looked at the man who had stood by me when I was drafting by candlelight. I wanted him to be wrong. I desperately wanted to prove that my mother loved me more than my bank account. I'll do it, I said. I'll call them tomorrow. The next morning, the sun was too bright. It felt like a spotlight on a crime scene. I sat on the edge of the bed, scrolling back through the endless digital tether to my family. That's when I saw it. It was a notification for a group chat I'd muted months ago. It was a thread between Sarah and my mother. I scrolled up, my heart hammering. I saw a message from 3 weeks ago, the day my firm's sale was first rumored. My mother's words jumped off the screen. If the rumors are true and she's selling, we need to move fast. Sarah, start talking about the expansion for the boutique. I'll handle the health scare routine. We need to lock her into a commitment before she starts thinking the money is hers. Sarah's reply was instantaneous. Don't worry, Mom. She's so desperate for your approval she'll sign anything if you cry hard enough. Just make sure Dad stays quiet. He's terrible at lying. My mother's response, he knows the stakes. If she doesn't pay for the estate taxes this year, we're all out on the street. She's our retirement plan, Sarah. Always has been. I sat there for an hour, the phone a hot, vibrating coal in my hand. It wasn't an impulse. It was a coordinated, tactical strike. They had a playbook. They had mapped out my insecurities, my need for a mother's hug and a sister's respect, and they had turned those needs into a currency. I felt a strange sensation then. It wasn't a break. It was a snap, the sound of a bone finally being set into its proper place. The trembling in my hands stopped. I walked downstairs, my footsteps heavy and deliberate. Julian was in the kitchen. He didn't have to turn around to know. He could hear the change in the way I moved. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just picked up the phone and dialed my mother's number. She picked up on the first ring. Elena, darling. I was just about to call you. My chest has been feeling so tight this morning, I was wondering if... Mom, I interrupted, my voice flat. I need you to listen. Something happened. The firm, it's gone. The audit was a disaster. The investors pulled out, the debt called, and I've lost everything. I'm bankrupt, Mom. The bank is taking the house on Friday. There was a silence on the other end of the line. It wasn't the silence of a mother horrified that her child was about to be homeless. It was the clinical silence of a predator who had just realized the trap was empty. When she finally spoke, her voice wasn't warm anymore. It was sharp and cold. What do you mean, everything? She hissed. What about the quarterly allowance for the estate? What about Sarah's boutique expansion? Elena, how could you be so incredibly selfish to let this happen right before our anniversary gala? She didn't ask if I was okay. She didn't ask if Julian and I had a place to go. She simply paused, the gears of a new plan already turning, and said, I have to call your father. We'll see what can be salvaged. Then, she hung up. I stared at the dead screen. I turned to Julian. She didn't ask if I had food, I whispered. He just nodded, his eyes filled with a sad, grim validation. But as I went to put the phone down, it buzzed again. A new message in the family group chat. My mother, in all caps, to Sarah and my father, she's broke. The firm is gone. Do not, under any circumstances, lend her a dime. She is dead weight now. I looked at the message, then at the date on the calendar. The gala was in 4 days. They thought I was a ghost. They didn't realize I was the one who still held the keys to the house they were standing in. The silence following my mother's final text wasn't empty, it was the sound of a vacuum. Within 4 hours, the digital ties that bound me to my family began to snap. I watched my phone screen as the Family Sunday group chat, the one filled with curated photos of Sarah's daughter and my mother's garden, simply vanished. I had been removed. No explanation. No, are you okay? Just a clinical excision of the dead weight. I sat in my office, the $15 million wire confirmation sitting on my desk like a glowing coal. Julian walked in, his face unreadable. Sarah just posted, he said, handing me his phone. I looked at the screen. My sister had posted a black and white photo of a stormy sky with a caption about cutting out toxic energy and protecting one's own harvest. The comments were filled with her high society friends offering heart emojis. She was already crafting the narrative. I wasn't a sister in crisis, I was a failure who had become a burden. I picked up the phone and dialed Sarah directly. She picked up on the 5th ring, her voice sounding like she was talking to a telemarketer. Elena. I'm actually in the middle of a fitting for the gala. What is it? Sarah, I said, keeping my voice low, I just told Mom about the bankruptcy. I don't even know where I'm going to store my drafting equipment. I was wondering if I could use your spare garage for a month. A sharp, jagged laugh came through the speaker. My garage? Elena, Todd, and I are in the middle of a massive lifestyle transition. We can't have your clutter devaluing the property right now. Honestly, after everything Mom told me about your bad decisions, I think it's best if we have some space. You've always found a way to make your drama everyone else's problem. Figure it out. The line went dead. The girl I had paid $8,000 in tuition for just 3 months ago didn't have room for my boxes. I looked at Julian. She didn't even hesitate, I whispered. He leaned against the doorframe, his arms crossed. Because the bank is closed, Elena. And they don't talk to customers with a zero balance. That was the moment the lake inside me froze solid. I wasn't just losing a family, I was discovering I never actually had one. The invitation to the 45th anniversary gala sat on my mantel, heavy cardstock with gold leaf edges. I had paid for the catering. I had paid for the vintage champagne. I had even paid the deposit on the Rosewood Ballroom 6 months ago. On Wednesday afternoon, my mother called. Her voice was careful, the measured, artificial tone she used when she was about to perform an act of public execution while calling it mercy. Elena, sweetheart, she began, I've been talking to your father. We've been praying about your situation. And we really think it's best if you and Julian sit this gala out. I gripped the edge of the granite counter until my knuckles turned white. You're uninviting me to your anniversary, Mom? After 20 years of me never missing a single event? Don't be dramatic, she snapped, the mask slipping for a second. You're going through a public failure, Elena. People in this town talk. I've worked 45 years to maintain the Vance family name, and having you there, well, I'm sure you can't even afford a proper dress now. It would just cast a pall over the evening. I don't want the guests whispering about your bankruptcy while we're trying to celebrate our legacy. We'll do something quiet later. Just family. Just family, I repeated. The words felt hollow, like a bell with no clapper. Exactly. I'm sure you understand. It's for the best. She hung up before I could respond. She wasn't worried about my feelings, she was worried that my poverty would stain her social standing. I stood in my kitchen, staring at the gold leaf invitation. Julian walked over and picked it up. Are we staying home? He asked. I looked at him, and for the first time in weeks, I smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a woman who had spent 20 years calculating stress loads and structural integrity. I knew exactly where the weak points were. "No," I said. "We're going. And I'm wearing the Dior suit I bought with the first installment of the buyout." Thursday night should have been a time of rest, but the ghosts in my phone wouldn't let me sleep. I was digging through my archived emails when a forwarded thread from 6 months ago caught my eye. It was from my father's personal account, sent to my mother's private email. I had been copied on it by accident, buried in a massive chain of architectural specs. I opened it, and the world stopped turning. It was an inquiry from the conglomerate that eventually bought my firm. They had reached out to the local Chamber of Commerce 6 months ago to vet my reputation. My father, a former board member, had received the inquiry directly. The email was clear: "We are prepared to offer a record-breaking sum for Vance Architectural." My father had forwarded it to my mother with a single, chilling note: "Don't tell her. If she gets that kind of capital all at once, she'll retire or move. We need her to keep the contracts rolling for at least another year to finish the estate renovations. Keep the tuition and roof requests coming. It keeps her hungry and focused. We'll tell her when we're ready." They knew. For 6 months, they had known a life-changing fortune was waiting for me, and they deliberately hid it so they could keep milking me for $5,000 emergencies. They didn't just want my money, they wanted me trapped. They were willing to let me work myself into an early grave as long as the estate stayed renovated. I felt a heat behind my eyes that wasn't tears. It was a cold, white-hot clarity. I looked at the family tax ledger Julian had written. I looked at the uninvitation. And then I looked at the wire transfer confirmation for $15 million. I spent the rest of the night printing. I printed the email. I printed the group chat transcripts. I folded them into my silk clutch. As the sun began to rise on the day of the gala, I wasn't a grieving daughter anymore. I was an architect about to oversee a very controlled demolition. I looked at Julian as he woke up. "I found the foundation," I said, showing him the email. He read it in silence, his jaw tightening. "What's the plan?" he asked. I checked the time. The gala started at 7. "We arrive at 8, I said. "Right when the toasts begin. I want the room full when I finally give my mother exactly what she asked for." I walked to the closet and pulled out the black Dior suit. It was sharp, professional, and expensive, a suit for a woman who owned the skyline, not a woman who begged for a place in a garage. My phone buzzed one last time. It was a text from a neighbor: "Just saw your mom and Sarah. They look like royalty. Everyone's asking where you are. Sarah told them you were too unwell to attend." I didn't reply. I just checked the fold of the documents in my purse. The structural integrity of the Vance family was about to be tested, and I already knew it wouldn't hold. The rain had stopped by the time we reached the outskirts of the city, leaving the asphalt slick and reflective like a black mirror. Julian drove in a silence so absolute it felt heavy. I sat in the passenger seat, my hand resting on the silk clutch that held the blueprints of my family's destruction. I wasn't thinking about the $15 million. I was thinking about that email, the one where my father, the man who taught me how to read a level, had leveled me instead. I leaned my head against the cold glass. For 6 months, I had been a resource to be managed, a harvest to be timed. They had watched me come home with circles under my eyes, gray with exhaustion, and they had simply calculated how much more of my life they could squeeze out before the big reveal. My father hadn't protected me, he had curated my struggle. "You're shaking," Julian said softly. I looked down at my hands. They weren't trembling from fear. It was the vibration of a machine pushed past its limit. "I'm not shaking, Julian," I said, my voice sounding like it was coming from a long way off. "I'm calibrating." We passed the old construction yard, the one my father had handed me like a broken toy. I realized then that he hadn't given it to me because he believed I could fix it. He gave it to me because he thought it would keep me small enough to control, but useful enough to pay the bills. He hadn't counted on me building a fortress out of the rubble. As we turned onto the drive of the Rosewood, the glowing lanterns of the valet stand looked like a line of fire. Are you ready? Julian asked as he killed the engine. I looked at the gold leaf invitation sitting on the dashboard. I've been building toward this for 20 years, I said. It's time to see if the foundation holds. The Rosewood Ballroom was a sea of champagne, silk, and forced laughter. I stood in the foyer for a moment, invisible behind a pillar, watching the performance. There was my mother, Sophia, draped in lace that I knew was charged to my business account 6 months ago. She was holding court at table 1, her head tilted back in that practiced, aristocratic laugh. And there was Sarah, glowing in a dress that cost more than a year of my mortgage, leaning into a group of investors and whispering behind a manicured hand. I didn't need to hear the words to know the script. I was the unwell sister. The unfortunate one. The cautionary tale used to make their success look like destiny rather than a subsidy. The room was packed. 100 people, the town's elite, the church elders, the very people my mother had told I was a bankrupt failure. I felt the weight of the documents in my purse. Julian stepped up beside me, his navy sport coat sharp against the light. The toasts are starting, he murmured. We walked in. The silence didn't happen all at once. It rippled out from the entrance like a shockwave. I saw guests drop their appetizers and whisper to their spouses. But most of all, I saw my mother. Her glass stopped halfway to her lips. Her eyes went wide, then narrow, then cold. She just watched me glide across the floor in a $3,000 Dior suit, looking like the woman who owned the building, not the woman who had lost it. I didn't head for the family table. I headed for the back, near the window, and I waited. I watched as Sarah leaned into my mother's ear, her face turning a panicked shade of red. The poor relation had crashed the party, and the unwell story was dying in real time. The clink of a spoon against a crystal glass signaled the peak of the evening. Sarah stepped up to the microphone, her eyes darting toward me for a split second before she plastered on a fake smile. Thank you all for being here, she began, her voice amplified and shaking with honeyed emotion. 45 years of marriage is a legacy. And legacy is about what we leave behind. It's about the strength of the Vance name. She paused, taking a dramatic breath. We all know that family means standing together when things get difficult. And while some of us have faced challenges recently, she looked directly at me, her voice dripping with pity. Todd and I wanted to share some light. The room leaned in. My mother sat up straighter, her hand clutched over her heart. We just put the deposit down on the penthouse at Maple Ridge, Sarah announced. The room erupted in applause. My mother let out a theatrical sob of joy. Sarah waited for the noise to die down, then turned back to me. And Elena, sister. I know how hard the bankruptcy has been. I know you've lost your home. So, in front of all our friends, I want to offer you our old apartment. Rent-free for 6 months. Because that's what a Vance does. We don't leave our own behind, even when they fail. The soft clapping from the room felt like a physical weight. Someone actually patted my shoulder from the next table. Sarah stood there, the benevolent savior, basking in the glow of my public humiliation. She had used my ruin as the pedestal for her triumph. She looked at me, waiting for the grateful tears, waiting for me to nod and accept the crumbs. Instead, I stood up. I didn't say a word. I just walked toward the riser, the sound of my heels on the hardwood the only thing anyone could hear. Sarah's smile began to flicker like a dying bulb. She reached for the microphone, but I was already there. I didn't take it, I just stood beside her, looking out at the 100 people who thought they knew exactly who I was. The room held its breath, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the silence. I was the one who had created it. The air on the riser was thin, vibrating with the hum of the microphone and the sharp intake of 100 breaths. Sarah's hand remained frozen in midair, a scripted gesture of charity that had nowhere to land. I didn't look at her. I looked at Todd, her husband, who was already stepping onto the stage. He didn't look like a man celebrating a penthouse. He looked like a man trying to close a deal before the market crashed. He pulled a folded sheaf of papers from his blazer. He didn't offer them with a hug, he slid them onto the lectern like a summons. It's a formality, Elena, he whispered, his voice carrying just enough for the front row to hear. Since you're between things, First Prairie Lending needs a third signature. Sarah and I are using the family estate as collateral for the Maple Ridge loan. Mom and Dad have already signed. We just need the final heir's consent to authorize the lien. It's just a paper, really. A way for us to keep the family assets working for the family. I looked down at the document. The ink was so fresh I could still smell it. My mother's signature was there, elegant and looped. My father's was a jagged line beside it. They weren't just uninviting me to a party, they were inviting me to mortgage my own inheritance to pay for Sarah's vanity. They needed my bankrupt name to verify that I had no competing claims on the house I had spent 10 years renovating with my own sweat and capital. A formality, I repeated, my voice catching the microphone and echoing through the ballroom. You want me to sign away the roof over Mom and Dad's head so you can have a marble foyer? The ahs in the room shifted instantly to an uneasy murmur. I saw my mother half rise from her chair, her face a mask of panicked fury. Elena, sit down, she hissed. But I wasn't sitting. I was reaching into my bag. I'm not signing this, Todd, I said, my voice silencing the clink of silverware in the back of the room. I won't sign it because I won't participate in a lie. And I won't sign it because this family has been built on formalities that are actually just chains. Sarah grabbed my arm, her fingernails digging into my sleeve. You selfish bitch, she whispered. You have nothing. You're a failure. Just sign the paper and take the apartment. It's the only win you're ever going to get. I looked at my sister, and I realized she didn't even see a person standing there. She saw a broken ATM she was trying to kick one last time. I leaned into the microphone. You say I have nothing, Sarah? You say I'm a failure because I didn't marry the right names? Is that what you told everyone here? That I'm the poor relation who couldn't keep her head above water? My father stood up. His chair scraped the floor like a bone snapping. Elena, enough, he barked. This is our anniversary. Don't do this to your mother. Don't do what, Dad? Tell the truth? I pulled the first document from my purse, the $15 million wire confirmation. I held it up so the chandeliers caught the bank's official seal. 3 weeks ago, I sold my firm. Not because it was failing, but because I built it into the most valuable architectural asset in 3 states. $15 million. It cleared on Tuesday. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of 100 people recalculating their entire social hierarchy in a single heartbeat. My mother's face went from red to a ghostly white. I didn't stop. I pulled out the group chat transcripts. And when I told you I was broke? Within 4 hours, you removed me from the family chat. Within 6, Sarah told me I was toxic. And Mom? You told them not to lend me a dime, because I did this to myself. I dropped the pages onto the lectern. I wasn't bankrupt. I was just testing the structural integrity of this family. And as it turns out, you don't even have a foundation. Sarah was staring at the $15 million figure, her mouth hanging open. The charity apartment was a joke now. But the killing blow was still in my hand. I turned to my father. But the money isn't the reveal, is it, Dad? I pulled out the final email, the one from 6 months ago. The one where he told my mother to hide the buyout offer so they could keep the tuition and roof scams running. I read it aloud. Every word. I read his note about keeping me hungry and focused so I would finish the estate renovations on my dime. A guest gasped. A man at table 4 stood up and walked toward the exit. The room was no longer a gala, it was a courtroom. I looked at my father, the man who had taught me to build. You knew for 6 months that I could have walked away. You knew I was working 80-hour weeks, falling asleep at my desk, while you and Mom were planning which emergency to fake next. You didn't just want my money, Dad. You wanted my life. My father didn't deny it. He just looked down at his hands, looking smaller and more pathetic than I had ever seen him. My mother found her voice then, a shrill, desperate sound. We were protecting you, Elena. We didn't want you to make a hasty decision. From the front row, Loretta Briggs stood up. She didn't shout. She just looked at my mother with cold disappointment. Patty, we've all watched you bleed her dry for 20 years. Don't lie to us now. We have eyes. A murmur of agreement surged through the room. The facade was gone. The Vance legacy was a pile of ash on the ballroom floor. I folded the documents and looked at Julian. He was waiting at the bottom of the riser, his hand extended. I stepped down, leaving Sarah and Todd standing on the stage with a lone document that was now worth less than the paper it was printed on. As I walked toward the door, I didn't look back at the white-faced woman at table 1 or the broken man beside her. I was looking at the exit, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't just designing an exit, I was taking it. The heavy oak doors of the Rosewood Ballroom swung shut behind us, cutting off the suffocating scent of lilies and the panicked silence of 100 people. The hallway was a long, marble throat. As I walked, I realized I wasn't waiting for the sound of my father's voice calling me back. For 20 years, I had lived for that sound, the hope of a wait or an I'm sorry. But now, the only sound was my own rhythmic, certain pace. Julian didn't say a word until we reached the cool night air of the parking lot. He stopped by the driver's side door and looked at me over the roof of the car. The orange glow of the streetlights caught the steady pride in his eyes. You okay? He asked. I leaned my head back, looking up at the gray clouds of a March sky. The invisible vice that had been clamped around my ribs since I was 20 years old, the one labeled debt and duty, simply loosened. For the first time in my life, I said, I don't feel like I'm falling. We drove away, leaving the gold leaf invitations and the mortgaged estate in the rearview mirror. I pulled my phone from my clutch. The notifications were a digital landslide. My mother, Elena, come back. We can fix this. I'm having palpitations. My sister, you've ruined everything. Todd is leaving. I hope you're happy with your blood money. I didn't delete them. I didn't reply. I just turned the phone off and watched the dark fields of the county line blur into a single, clean horizon. I was no longer the architect of their luxury, I was finally the architect of my own peace. The aftermath was a clinical reversal. Within 48 hours, the family tax Julian had documented began to work in reverse. Without my signature, the bank pulled the plug on Sarah and Todd's penthouse mortgage before the ink was even dry. Their $40,000 down payment vanished into a non-refundable clause. By Tuesday, Sarah was posting about minimalism and finding one's soul in smaller spaces, though rumors of Todd moving into the guest room traveled faster than a prayer request. Then came the apology tour. It arrived on Thursday as a 3-page email from my father. It was polished and desperate. He used the word proud 5 times in the first paragraph, a word he hadn't used once in 20 years. He talked about misunderstandings. He sounded like a man who had suddenly realized his retirement plan had grown a spine and walked out the door. I read it at my kitchen table, my $15 million now neatly filed in a private trust. Julian sat across from me. They're not sorry they hurt you, he said. They're sorry they can't afford the lifestyle of the people who hurt you anymore. He was right. The apologies were just another set of blueprints. Another attempt to build a bridge back to my bank account. I didn't reply. Instead, I sent one final message to the family group chat before hitting leave. I am setting up a restricted education fund for my niece. It is inaccessible to everyone else. As for the rest of you, do not contact me. I am out of the business of saving people who don't want to be saved. I set the phone face down. The silence that followed was the first one in my life that didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a foundation. 6 months later, the world looks different from a porch that doesn't owe anyone a cent. We moved east to a stretch of land with a spring-fed creek and soil that doesn't care about social standing. I started a small, private studio, no skyscraper contracts, no corporate boards. Just a drafting table, a view of the apple trees, and the company of a man who loved me when I had nothing but a garage and a dream. Loretta Briggs drives out every other Saturday. She brings a cherry pie and news from the town I left behind. She told me my mother hasn't been back to the Rosewood since the gala. She told me Sarah is working at a real estate firm, actually earning a paycheck. And she told me my father still walks to the post office every day, looking for a letter that isn't coming. I listen, and I feel a twinge of sadness, but it's distant, like a scar that only aches when the weather changes. I'm telling you this because I know someone watching this is holding a pen right now, ready to sign away their soul to keep a perfect family from cracking. I'm telling you this because for 15 years, I thought my value was measured in how much I could give. I was wrong. Your value isn't in your utility. It isn't in your ability to be a safety net for people who refuse to learn how to walk. If your family treats you like a ledger instead of a person, you are allowed to close the books. You are allowed to walk away from the people who want to keep you hungry so they can stay full. I lost a mother's approval, but I gained a life that actually belongs to me. My name is Elena Vance. I am 44 years old. And for the first time in my life, I am not an ATM, I am not a resource, and I am not a failure. I am free. If this story felt like a mirror, then it's time for you to stop looking at the glass and start walking through the door. Subscribe if you're ready to build your own fortress. Because you are worth more than the dirt they tried to bury you in. Always.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe Family Files for more.